Welcome to another episode of Crown Unfiltered, the best car design podcast on the planet, the realist. We speak to the cream of the crop, the OGs, the working class people, the minions, the shop floor soldiers, people like me, people like you, and everybody in between. This week we have the legendary Martin Longmore on the show. He is a car designer, he is a motorcycle designer, he is a race car driver, he is a maker, he gets done. Unfortunately, our line was a little bit dodgy, at times it affected the conversation, but let me tell you, there is some gold in this man's words. What makes this guy truly unique is that he has contributed to some of the most iconic automotive designs in modern history, including the BMW Z3 and the Audi TT. If you go and do your own homework, you will see that things are not quite as they seem. Martin, let's just start off by you giving a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do.
Right. Well, I'm a consultant automotive, so car and motorcycle designer, and I've been doing this now for the past, well, I suppose we're getting on for 38, 40 years, I suppose. Seems incredible, but yeah. I've worked internationally, so most of the European car manufacturers at some point, and I've also had a trip to the States.
Yeah, so I'll have to make a list of all the places that you've worked at, because the list is just, it's endless. And there's a bunch of car OEMs, as well as you've done, I would say, it seems like at least half of your career doing motorcycles as well. We usually go into like a biographic background on the designer, and it's just there's way too much to list here, and I want to try something a little bit different. We can skim over that, because the interesting thing is that you grew up in a place called Dumfries in Scotland, which was hardly the car design mecca back in the day. I wondered if you could tell me a bit about how you got into car design and how you came to realize that it was a thing.
Okay. Well, I actually grew up in a very rural area, even more country than Dumfries. So it was actually about 10 miles from Dumfries, a place called LONGMORE. And that's farming community, small village. And yes, it's hardly a design mecca, as you put it. My interest from a very young age was actually racing, car racing, motorsport. And I suppose if I go back to my earliest memories, I could tell you that my mother taught me to drive when I was about 6. She put me in her MG midget and ran alongside and told me which pedals to push. So I had a very early grounding in how to drive a car. And I've often thought what actually started the interest in the racing side. And as well as driving, I could also draw quite well. So it's hard for me to separate the two, because they were quite combined. And in that small community, let's say, you have to make your own entertainment. I'm also was fortunate in that my family are a medical family, so my father was the local doctor, and that allowed us a certain amount of, you could say, some privileges, or certain things, acts or mischief that you got up to was overlooked by the local constabulary. How else could I put it? I was drawing And I noticed that I had this idea that if I was going to race, which I really wanted to do badly, then to earn the money to do that, I was going to have to be able to draw very well, and came to the conclusion that I'd have to design my own racing cars in order to drive them. And I know it sounds. It might sound strange to youngsters today, but we had no access to anything like the access one has today to global trends or information or knowledge of racing or design or anything like that. Most of it you had to glean yourself, whichever way you could. And I could tell you that one of my earliest memories is going to the local library and then finding old racing books and then tracing through these old books. And don't forget, Lochmaben was a very small place. Then you would have to get the book ordered from Lochmaben Library, the local library, over to Dumfries, and then they would have to search to find the book that you were looking for. So it was quite a long process. And things like drawing the cars as I went along, and then learning about that and techniques. Well, in these days it was just pen and paper and crayons. What else could I say? One of my earliest memories as well is my interest in the Formula One and the motor racing side. So I'd be around about 9 or 10 years old. Then I would start writing to the different Formula One teams and ask for if they'd be kind enough to send me some stickers or decals or some photographs. And I still, somewhere in the loft, there's some of these old pictures and stickers that would come from, for example, McLaren. I had letters back from Bruce McLaren and
wow,
signed, autographed photographs, original stickers. And these were the types of things that you did, I did at that time, just to get involved. Colin Chapman at Lotus, yeah.
Did you know that? Did you instinctively join the dots and say that somebody must have designed this, and therefore there is got to be a way for me to do this as a career?
Not at that point. I didn't really see it like that. It was just an evolution. Once you could start drawing things, and then projects at school, there was one thing we had to fill a scrapbook. Well, inevitably, I ended up just drawing lots and lots of cars, and then pasting in the information I was getting from these other, like I say, McLaren or Lotus or BRM, paste it into, because the idea was to have a really impressive project to present to the school teacher. And, I suppose there was some element of competition because, at that stage you wanted to produce the best scrapbook.
Fascinating. Martin, I read that that your mother had a chance meeting with Ian Callum's mother as well, and that they
right.
that they got talking, and that is kind of how you worked out what you needed to do in order to break into the career. Was Ian already an established local boy in the scene, or how did that happen?
So what it was, again, you've got to understand, in these small, I say communities, more or less the professional, the doctors hang out with the architects and the architects hang out with the bankers, and everybody sort of mixes socially, or did in those days anyway. And it seems that my mother and Ian's mother had met at one of those cocktail functions and had got speaking, but they already, I suppose, more or less knew each other anyway. and my father would know Ian's father. And they just got talking, and okay, we're jumping forward till mid-teens, my mid-teens. And I guess at that point, my parents would be thinking, well, what are we going to do with him? He's got to have something to follow, that he doesn't end up a no-hoper, and by that, coming, or my father being the doctor, he wasn't exactly, he was more in that medical profession. It wasn't about art and design and sketching and, how could you earn a living doing something like that? Do you understand what I mean? It was, I suppose, from a practical point of view. So, long story short, the mothers had got speaking, and my son just spends all his time sketching cars or playing with cars, and oh well, that's just like my son Ian. Ian's the same. They ought to speak to each other, and that's how it essentially started. So my mother had given me a phone number and said they call up Ian, and his mum said that he'll be prepared to speak to you, And it just started from that. So I did, and went over, and
he wasn't a designer yet.
At that point, Ian would be a little bit older, but he was already, I think, had been doing different courses, and perhaps he was already at the Glasgow School of Art course. I think it could be something like that. Let's say we're talking about mid-teens. It's difficult to exactly put a date on it, but. Anyway, he was kind enough to give me some background information and what I should be looking at, and the type of colleges that perhaps I could apply to or look into. And so this information was great, because I had no other way of knowing it at that time. So from that, then I started to look into what would be, for example, Napier College in Edinburgh. They had a type of design school course. Newcastle Polytechnic at that time had a design for industry. I think there was also a Welsh college in Swansea, perhaps. So it was just to start to find that information in order to make a decision where would be a good place to continue. And I can remember putting together a portfolio. This was obviously fairly essential, but just spending quite a bit of time doing sketching all different things, not just cars and but also leaves and trees and plants, everything round about, and making some type of sculptures which would show evidence of one's creative or artistic nature. And because I think at that stage anyway, the design schools were not so concerned about seeing brilliant drawings, because they knew you'd be too young to be doing that or have the exposure to it. So they're quite prepared to accept every type of evidence of your artistic nature, let's say. Anyway, so I ended up taking a visit up to Edinburgh to look at Napier College. Had a look around, and I thought it struck me as being far too stiff. It was almost like back to school, and and I really didn't need that. That wasn't my nature. And then across to Newcastle. And as soon as I walked into the Polytechnic, it just had a whole different vibe. And walking through, I can remember still to some extent, walking through the fine art area, which were these large open workshops, very high ceilings, and an exciting place to be if you've never experienced it before. And just to see that, and I just thought, wow, this is it. I'm going to get started here. And then went through with the interview and spoke to the lecturers interviewing, and for example, even presenting with the portfolio, I actually took one of my go-kart engines with me as to show them that my ability with my hands, because when I was racing go-karts, we had to tune the engines ourselves as well. So just to show them all the little tricks and things that I was able to do from handcraft, as it were.
Newcastle Polytechnic was the precursor to Northumbria. That's the same?
Yes,
that's the
exactly.
same institution. Okay,
exactly.
So
yes.
I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. So you went to Newcastle. You went to Newcastle and had a great experience there. And one of the things that was very significant for your development and exposure was this competition that you entered. I wondered if you could elaborate. Could you talk a little bit about what that competition did for you?
I think we're talking about the Royal Society of Arts Bursary competition, which was
exactly.
for a car for the 1990, was it? Or
yes,
something
yes.
like that.
So I believe.
Right. And so the idea was that the Design for Industry course, as it was known, was what I was doing at Newcastle. And it was mostly biased towards product design and industrial design. And to be able to do the car design aspect of it, you had to really do that yourself and find out and make your own way. It wasn't actually taught at Newcastle. So I would try and steer my projects towards car and transportation design. So any project that came up that we were asked to do, I'd try and find an angle that it was more to do with transportation as opposed to product design. So with coming to the point of the bursary was that I thought, well, I can make a final year project as a present my idea of a car, and at the same time, one of the other tutors there had said, well, look, there's a bursary, and your work's quite good, and I'd recommend that you put it forward to this Royal Society of Arts bursary competition. So on his advice, and they submitted my work for that, and some weeks went past, and then I had a letter confirming that I was a finalist, and of course that was a massive boost, and also for the course, the Newcastle course, the tutors were really happy about that. You can imagine they were also finally they've seen some other students coming through, and they're promoting their work, and okay, the level of competition was very high because it was open nationwide, and at that time then I was a finalist along with one of the Royal College of Art students, and the point being that the Royal College of Art, you would expect guys to be finalists because they were all postgraduate. They've already done their initial undergraduate works. It was quite unusual for any students that were undergraduates to be listed as finalists. So the other finalist was Murray Callum, who's the younger brother of Ian. So it was pretty funny that in the same year, Murray and myself were the finalists of the Royal Society of Arts bursary, and it was won by, the first place was given to Pinky Lai, who, as you probably know,
Wow.
Then went on to Porsche. So what I was going to say was one aspect that was interesting for me for Newcastle. they had no idea about the car design side at all, essentially. None at all. And an example of the clay modeling, which I'd like to tell you this little story about. I asked if there was a way that I could do these models, you see. And one of the senior tutors said to me, yeah, and there's a cupboard at the back of the workshops, and it's got clay, Chavant, styling clay. Right. How do I use it? Well, fill a bucket of hot water and put it in it to soften it up. What? Well, I think that's how you do it. Can't. So tried that. Doesn't work. You know what styling clay is like. Doesn't work in a bucket of hot water. And I thought, these guys have really got no idea. Anyway, I found a way to do it, which was to take the ovens that they used for their pottery classes, and I warmed up the clay, and it was a case of trial and error because too hot, and that stuff just melts into and crystallizes, and it really smells the place out. And initially, the smell of burning clay was permeating through the whole of the Newcastle design faculty at some stages, till I found the correct temperature to work it. That was the way of, I suppose, finding your own way, teaching yourself, and to some extent, you've heard the expression, invention's the mother of, necessity is the mother of invention. And that was basically how I'd grown up. So from the karts, go-karting, the design world, and even with the clay modeling. The point being that I was able to produce a small clay model as well for the Bursary project. So I actually had a three-dimensional, a small one, which I still have somewhere. And I was able to add to the presentation by taking some photographs of that and essentially to show the complete three-dimensional thinking. And then for the final project, the final model, I actually constructed a more or less 1/3 scale in the workshops in Newcastle, which was, whilst the Bursary was already being decided, I'd gone ahead on that basis that I could create a bigger version of the model from my degree show. So I had a grounding in clay modeling very early as well, and that's a very important part of the understanding three-dimensional form, and also in understanding what you've drawn and putting it into 3 dimensions. As a car designer, as you know, that's critical.
Martin, did you after winning that, or after getting that bursary, you went over to Italy, is that right? To meet the carrozzeria.
The criteria of you had to give a good reason why they should award you some prize money, and what you would put it to best use for. So I was very curious about meeting, or trying to meet some of the famous design people of Italy, because they were the ones that one aspired to at that time. And so I persuaded the jury that yes, I would use that money very sensibly. I would put it towards my travel, which I intended to make to Italy, and I'd use that money most sensibly and visit Giugiaro, Pininfarina, Bertone, Sagato, and any of the other ones that I could meet on the travel. So that's what I did.
No, I wanted to know what you got out of that trip, out of those meeting your heroes, so to speak.
The first thing was to see what I would say was the reality. I had in my head some of these studios would be fantastic, incredible places. Turning up at Jujaro, for example, and it was an industrial estate on the outskirts of Turin, didn't quite fit with my vision. Pininfarina was impressive because they had this big wind tunnel facility on outside, and so architecturally that was impressive. Zagato, Zagato was almost like going down to some of the back streets, small workshops in the back streets of some of Naples maybe, or somewhere. It was like really funny. So all I'm trying to say is that if you haven't seen it or experienced it, to come across the reality. Okay, so these guys are creating on an industrial estate in Turin. I say, whereas in my head I might have envisaged it as a massive villa or incredible studios. It wasn't like that at all. And then with regard to actually meeting, for example, Giugiaro, okay, I couldn't speak any Italian, and he was very kind to say some words with me, and then he had his right-hand man there, I suppose, who took me for a little tour of what they could show me, around the foyer and in one or two of the rooms, and then presented me with a book, and likewise at Pininfarina and Bertoni as well. And I still have some of those books. Yeah.
You met Marcelo Gandini as well, right?
I met Gandini, but this was on another occasion.
Okay.
This was later. I met Gandini. Gandini I met in 1986 at the Turin Motor Show. Not actually at the show, but I had this idea that I really wanted to meet him because he seemed to be the guy behind all the most amazing supercars at that time. And yet he wasn't very well publicized, or it was very difficult to find out much about him. And when they presented a show car that I made for AUDI at Turin, which the show car was called Alien, on that basis I was able to come in contact with one or two of the journalists in Turin, and one of whom was also part editor of the Car Styling magazine. He was the Italian side of it, a guy called Perini. And he said, well, when I asked him, do you think it's possible to meet Gandini? He said, well, it's very, very difficult because the guy's like really, let's just put it like that. But I'll ask and see what we can do. And in fact, it came about. I was able to arrange that. They said, he doesn't speak really any English, so, and you don't speak any Italian. So I arranged to take a translator with me. And then we went, I was given some instructions where to drive, got a hire car and drove out of Turin to the foothills of, I suppose, the mountains on the outskirts of the Alps. And just the instruction was, go to this place and park there, and Mr. Gandini will come and meet you. So I'm parked there, and not knowing where I am really with the translator, and then suddenly this little blue Renault turned up. And it was Gandini. He just came out, said his hello, and then we had to follow him back to his villa, which actually turned out to be an old monastery that he was restoring. So it was very interesting, very, I say, exciting.
Do you remember what you talked about?
One of the things that struck Well, we it's like this. I could remember some or many of the things, and I remember I actually presented him with the brochure and the magazine of which had featured the concept car that I'd made for IAD, because in one of the, I think it was Car Magazine itself actually, they'd done a huge middle spread of the whole story, and so I felt quite good being able to present to Mr. Gandini as a type of, as my thanks for inspiring me to do the things that I'd come to do. And I think he quite appreciated that. And he also showed me around the small monastery that they were restoring at that time. And what I was looking for was his collection of Lamborghinis, which he didn't have. And I thought, what an incredibly modest, humble guy, you know. And I did ask him, and he said he doesn't really, he's not interested in collecting those cars, really, you know. And I thought, well, that's quite incredible, quite incredible.
So he didn't have sketches of his work all over the house and on the walls and everything, no?
Not particularly. He did have an area that, but as I say, at that time he was just, they were restoring it and I suppose building it up. I have seen since some videos where you see the final, or let's say more finished buildings, yes. But at that time, it wasn't all finished. But anyway, as I say, very, very, very kind host, and it was nice to have that contact, to meet him, and the translator that translated everything, I think, between us. It was a very memorable moment for me, very special.
I don't doubt it, Martin. I wonder if we can go back a second to your first proper professional job, which was at Ford. You, about a year into it, you allegedly felt that it wasn't progressive enough for you, and that's how you ended up making the transition to IAD, where you ended up working on the show car that you've just talked about. The question that I wanted to know was, how did you have the intuition to know that this is just not going fast enough and there must be something more progressive out there?
Well, I think it's quite simple, really. When I was, when I got to Royal College and I was sponsored by Ford, that allowed me to make during the holidays time, the vacation time, then you would go to the studio at Ford and use that time there. So, in the first, and Royal College is a 2-year course, so I think I went maybe 3-4 holidays to be at Ford Studios then. And initially, it's amazing. Walked in, and you think, that's it, I've arrived. Incredible. There's all the...
Made it.
Full design, there's the models, there's the whole thing that I've dreamt about for all these years, you know, and finally we're here. And then the incredibly gifted and talented design guys, you know, that were all working away and producing this amazing work. After some time, then you're always looking for the next, I suppose, how it's all progressed in that time. So after 2 years, then came to work there, and I have to say it didn't seem to have changed or advanced much in that time, or not as much as I'd expected. And the other thing was that it's quite different when you come there as a student without perhaps you're just there to learn, whereas employed as a full-time designer, then it's slightly different pressure. and perhaps you have to conform more. And I think that was maybe more difficult, because you can imagine that you can imagine what it feels like. So I was living in the centre of London and commuting every day to Dunton, which was quite a trek. But I preferred to be in the creative city as opposed to living out on the outskirts around Essex somewhere, around Dagenham or Dunton was the actual place. I'm sure that one could get used to it, but at that time it wasn't. I wasn't prepared to do that, and so that commute, at the best of times, was quite difficult. So in the morning out, maybe it's 40 miles probably, or 50 miles out of London, central London. I think maybe it's a little bit less, but anyway, a good hour's drive, right? So what I didn't appreciate would be 4:35 on a Friday evening, being asked to come by one of the managers to come and talk about the project. 4:35 on a Friday, when you know that you've got to get out the door by 10 to 5 to beat the rush hour. Otherwise, you're going to be 2 hours to drive back into London. And I began to realize that there's some of these guys were just operating on a type of position of power, or some kick that they would have out of that. And I think that, I thought, I can't deal with that. It's not necessary. So that's a side of it I probably haven't spoken much about. So I think we came to basic understanding that I wasn't going to fit into their hole, and their way of dealing things on a human level was not appreciated. Let's put it like that. Okay, so we kind of came to a mutual agreement at the end. I mean, it was a big step for me to leave Ford, actually. I do remember it caused me many sleepless nights, because I just married and had a young son, and that was our security, was working there. But I couldn't tolerate that type of, as I say, that type of power play, or whatever they wanted to call it. And especially when you're giving your best every day, and you with your design work. And I thought, right, let's. There'll be something else. Something else is going to turn up. And what it come to with AUDI. Now, what's funny how things can go in life. I'd usually would get the Financial Times newspaper Saturdays or weekend ones, because it was a good read, not the financial side, but there was a supplement side that had usually quite good, interesting things. And there was a feature about this guy called John Shute and his international automotive design. And for whatever reason, and the picture's this guy just holding a model above his head, like a 1-3 model above his head. For whatever reason, I cut that out and I kept it. And then after I'd, found out or decided that I'm not staying at Ford, I dug that out and I looked at it and I thought, well, I guess I've just got to get on the phone. And that's what I did. And so jumped down to, got on the phone to AUDI, was given an appointment more or less immediately, and had an interview with John Shute. And that opened a whole different door on a whole different aspect of design world that I actually knew nothing about at that time, with consulting and the possibility of working as consultant in that way. So it was a type of fate, I suppose. Type of fate, and AUDI was also, from the point of view of I say people management and relation and working environment was far different, much better, much more human.
Did you experience that kind of positive culture anywhere else that you've worked over the years?
Yes, I have done. I would say, you see, it depends on the type of project you're working on and the groups of people. But you normally, of course, when it's a smaller group of people, there's more personal contact and everybody is working for a common goal. And let's say it's not so much like a work then, it's more of how would you call it? I don't want to say lifestyle as such, but it's much more as a group activity. It has its own what's the word?
I think in that kind of environment that you're describing, you tend to take ownership more of what you're working on, and you're not thinking so much about the deliverables that I need to get through. It's more of like it's internally driven from inside you, right? You have a more of a personal vested interest in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
Yes, yes, you could say that. Yeah.
Martin, I want to. It would be a shame to not talk about this, given that it's such a big part of your career that kind of hasn't really been acknowledged. But I have to ask about the TT, which of course you were contributed to more than a significant amount, yet you don't seem to have been credited for that at all. You very politely described that it's disappointing that people behave in this way, and that that it's a shame that people that credit is not always given where credit's due. I wonder how you dealt with it at that time, where you weren't really acknowledged for the work for your contribution to that project.
Well, I think officially I'm still not acknowledged. And what can you do about that?
Do you want to?
I mean,
do you want to talk a little bit about what it was that your involvement in it? Because then that might give some context to the whole situation.
Short version is I made some sketches. I mean, I don't need to get into that whole thing, to be honest, Sam.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, it's been talked about enough. No.
Okay, we don't have to talk about it, Martin. It's absolutely okay. I just it's just a, you know, it's such an iconic vehicle. It was such a not just for Audi, but in terms of you know, it you could say that it changed the whole landscape of car design at that time. It was a real watershed moment, and I just yeah, I want to be respectful to everybody involved, but I imagine that it was probably quite painful as well to deal with, and you seem to have behaved really gracefully. So we don't have to talk about any more than that. I was just you know, it seems that you handled the whole thing very professionally. At least that's the way it appeared, and it would be nice to at least be able to you know, to give your perspective on how to move on from something like that, you know, to young kids that or young designers that might go through a similar thing, because it happens a lot. It still happens a lot.
It does. I think it happens less, and today, you know, we're talking about a project that is what 20, How long ago is it now?
Well, I mean, it's
95?
coming up for, I mean, it's at least 25,
30
20,
years
yeah,
ago.
almost 30 years ago. I mean, it was started in
And
93, apparently.
25, yeah. So today it's different with the social media possibilities, and I think that many of the companies, it's now in their interests to promote or allow information to come out about the projects and who the designers are. 25 years ago and more, it wasn't particularly. And perhaps it's just an inevitable aspect of all this social media. But back in the day, you were not encouraged to talk about your involvement in any of your projects. And somebody like myself as consultant designer, your career depended to some extent also on your ability to remain silent. Let's put it like that. And whereas today, it seems to me that rightly or wrongly, I don't know what the companies really, if they encourage it, or they've been forced to encourage it by social media today. So most of the young guys today and the young and the studios, they don't seem to put any restraints on the images and the information that is put out. Perhaps it's almost too hard to police today as well, you could say.
I would like to just add a little prefix there that I agree with that. However, it's still done in a very, very controlled manner. The big OEMs, we won't mention any specific one, but they've still got a very, it's still very much controlled. You know, if you're going to be putting a sketch out online with your signature on it, and especially if it's a project that is public and it's in the media and whatnot, they still want to control how those things are portrayed, and so I wouldn't say it's, you know, it's kind of it's still part of the bureaucracy somehow, you know. But yes, you're right. There's a transparency that it's had to become more transparent. I think for me, it's such a shame to be that short-sighted into thinking that if we hold back the names of our star designers, that somebody else is going to come and snap them up. And I think there is a great quote by Richard Branson, for example, where you treat somebody good enough, well, you give somebody all the tools to empower them to be able to go wherever they want to, but you treat them good enough that they stay. And that's so more powerful than trying to control everything, which I think it's an immense shame, and it's also quite stupid, frankly, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, I'd agree with you. There should be more transparency, definitely.
Martin, if in situations like that, I mean, back in the day where you kind of you know, everybody kind of knows everybody, and you know, you said that your livelihood very much depends on your ability to kind of keep quiet in situations like that. If you are not allowed to attach your name, or if it's not publicly recognized that your name wasn't attached to a certain project, how was it that people were able to realize what you are capable of?
Well, if I go back to, you know, if I think about for example, the IAD concept cars, there was no problem for IAD to promote their designers, and in this case myself, at all. And on that basis, IAD were approached by several companies, and the designers, with those designers' names in mind, to go and produce projects for these different companies as well, or to have a period to make some concept ideas. And so I benefited from that exposure very early, and that was, I suppose, my stepping stone that allowed me to or become better known, and that gave me the opportunity to then travel to the other and work in other studios. So I'm thinking, for example, you know, I came to BMW first in 1987, actually, to make some ideas for a touring motorcycle, and then a couple of years after that, again to in this case to produce some ideas for a car in the motorcycle group. And those opportunities obviously came about because they knew of who I was and what I could do. With those type of projects, I got exposed also very early to handling complete projects and overseeing from design sketch ideas through to clay models, all the aspects of the clay model, the three-dimensional form, the engineering aspects, feasibility. In the case of show cars, meeting the deadlines, really tight schedules, coming to work with the group of the whole team, you know, from on every aspect, from modelers, engineers, color and trim, painters, the fiberglass guys, and to do it within constraints of time, and to produce something that's going to go on the international stage. You know, to have that exposure early in your career and to have to deal with that, and the lessons that you learn from doing that is invaluable. And so, to some extent, many of the projects then that you're exposed to later, which are longer term in most of the OEMs, or let's say quite often, you can deal with very well, and you know the procedures, and you know and have a good idea of what is what's involved and what's possible and what you can achieve in the times that you've got to deal with. So as a way of structuring your work and your schedules, and being to some extent self-sufficient as well, I think that obviously the earlier you have these type of experiences, the better it is.